Replace these basic phrases with these more advanced phrases. This video is going to be perfect for improving your vocabulary skills. Hello, lovely students, and welcome to English with Tasha. Today, I will be teaching you some advanced phrases that you can use in your daily conversation. We are going to take basic phrases and I am going to give you advanced alternatives so you can really expand your vocabulary. But before we get started, I'd like to remind you that I'm starting my new group conversation classes for all levels online on Zoom, beginner, intermediate, and advanced, which will be held at different times and days throughout the week. These classes will be held on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 5 p.m. till 10 p.m., depending on your level. Firstly, let's talk about introductions and how we can introduce ourselves both formally and informally. Imagine that you are in a business meeting and you want to introduce yourself and your colleagues formally. Here's what a basic introduction would sound like. This is my colleague, Oliver. An advanced introduction, however, will sound more like this. Have you met my colleague Oliver? We work together. Or you can also say, have you met Oliver? Now let's look at how you would introduce yourself. Of course, inserting your name in the greetings. So a basic introduction would go more like this. Hello, I'm Tasha, or Lucy, John, Diego, Maria, whatever your name is. The advanced phrase, however, would sound more like this. I don't think we've been introduced. Or, I don't think we've met. I'm Tasha. A bonus to these introductions would be when we introduce someone that we know to someone else. Do you need any introductions? Or I'll be happy to introduce you to someone here. Let me know if you need an introduction. Now would be a good time for you to pause the video, have a little bit of practice using the phrases that I described before we move on. Or if you've got your pen or pencil ready, a time to make notes. Now let's move on to some advanced phrases for nice to meet you. When you meet someone for the first time, it's nice to say, it's nice to meet you, or nice to meet you. But here are some alternatives to these phrases. An alternative or more advanced way to say this is, it's a pleasure to meet you. And this is quite a formal phrase that you may want to use in your workplace. A less formal phrase would be, glad to meet you. Glad to meet you. Now, let's suppose you've been speaking with someone over Zoom, Google Meet, Teams for work purposes, and you're meeting them for the first time face to face. You could say something like this. It's great to finally meet you in person. Now, let's move on to another vital part of conversation. And this is, how are you? How are you? So, this is a phrase that I personally, yes, personally, find is one of the most overused in conversation. However, it is suitable for all occasions. You can use this phrase with your CEO, your boss, your family, your friends, and your colleagues. But if you're in a less formal situation, you might want to say something less formal, like these. How's it going? How's it going? How's everything with you? How's everything with you? What's going on? What's going on? What's happening? What's happening? Or you can use this one, my favorite. What have you been up to? What have you been up to? These questions ask the person that you're speaking to update them on what they've been doing since you last saw them. And finally, you can also ask, how's life? Or how's life treating you? Let's move on to the next question. And that is, where do you work? Where do you work? When you're getting to know someone, a really common question to ask is, where do you work? So here are some alternatives to that. A really common one in British English is, what do you do? Which is shortened from, what do you do for a living? If you know someone quite well and you know that they've changed jobs or that they change jobs quite often, then you could say something like this. Where are you working right now? Or, what are you doing for work at the moment? You could even say something like this. Did you end up getting that promotion? Or did you end up getting that job that you applied to last month? Another really common question, and I get this a lot when I travel, which is usually followed by the nationality people assume that I am, is, where are you from? Where are you from? And I have some great ways for you to say this question. If you want to make it sound more natural, you can say, whereabouts are you from? Whereabouts are you from? If you're wondering if someone is from the same area that you're from, you can say something like this. Are you local? Are you from around this local area? A really informal one would sound like this. Are you from around this neck of the woods? Are you from around this neck of the woods? Neck of the woods means local area, and it's a very common British slang. You could use the idiom neck of the woods in a variety of different ways and questions such as, how's the weather in your neck of the woods? How's the weather in your neck of the woods? And of course, talking about weather brings me to my very next question. The number one small talk question for everyone internationally is weather. Now, a really common British phrase to say is, lovely weather today, isn't it? Lovely weather today. Alternatively, assuming you've got really good weather and it's sunshiny outside, you could say, beautiful weather out, or beautiful out today, isn't it? Beautiful out today, isn't it? Meaning it's really lovely outside. Unfortunately, if you know British weather, you'll very well know that most often it's not beautiful out. It's usually pouring. So instead, we could use phrases such as, oh, it's a bit dreary today. It's a bit dreary today. Dreary meaning it's a bit dull or grey and a little bit depressing. And of course, since the weather is often forecasted incorrectly, we love making predictions about what the weather might be like in the future. So you can hear us sometimes saying something like, can you believe it's going to be something like 27 degrees out this weekend? Or, I can't believe it's going to rain all day tomorrow again. And my all time personal favourite is, I can't believe it's going to snow overnight. There's nothing better than waking up and looking outside the window to see the ground covered in that white fluffy stuff. At least it's for me, anyways. Okay, so now let's discuss alternatives to the question, do you want to? Do you want to? And that is asking someone if they want to do something. So, for example, we can say, do you want to go for a coffee? Or do you want to go for a pizza? And a very informal but very British sounding alternative is, do you fancy? Do you fancy? Do you fancy going for a coffee? Or do you fancy going for a pizza? You can also replace do you fancy with what do you think about? What do you think about? What do you think about going for a coffee? Or what do you think about going for a pizza? Or fish and chips, as it may be. Finally, if you've already made a decision about something and you want to check if someone agrees with what you say, you can say, any objections to a coffee? Or any objections to pizza tonight? And then you'll hope they'll say, that'll be lovely because you already ordered it anyways. Now let's move on to, do you agree? Do you agree? Now, this is the easiest way to ask someone's opinion of something, but there are some really good alternatives. What do you think? What do you think? Or the really British one, what do you reckon? What do you reckon? I reckon that we shouldn't go to the shops this weekend. Or I'll spend all of my money. Both of these are quite informal, but we do have some very formal ones for formal situations, such as, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, or I'm interested to know what you think about this idea. Now, what about changing the topic? And it's often one of those awkward things that we have to do. So instead of saying, can I change the topic? You can say this instead. I wanted to ask you about For example, I wanted to ask you about the new cafe in town. Have you tried it? Another really good one that you could use is speaking of. Speaking of, so if the other person mentioned something that we could use to change the topic, you can say, speaking of that, what about this? Speaking of lunch, have you tried the new cafe in town? Another option could be, that reminds me. That reminds me. How's Jessica? You can also use the phrase, before I forget. Before I forget. Before I forget, I must ask you this. And you ask something completely different. And finally, you could say, while I've got you here. While I've got you here, I wanted to ask you about that new project that we spoke about over the phone last week. You'll often hear this phrase used in business contexts. Now, the final conversation phrase for this lesson, at least, is goodbye. And I have some really good alternatives for this word. One of the most common alternatives is see you later. See you later. Or very informal, see ya. See ya later. But let's say you've been chatting with someone for too long and you have to go. I have some really good alternatives for this. I must be off. Oh, I must be off. And look at your watch. Make sure you're wearing a watch, because sometimes I tend to forget that I'm not wearing my watch and start tapping my wrist. So make sure you're wearing a watch for this one. Another really great one is, I've got to run. I've got to run. But it was great to see you. But it was great to see you, followed by that lovely bright smile. Or you can say, it's been lovely chatting to you, but I need to shoot off. It's been lovely chatting to you, but I really need to shoot off. These three phrases tells the other person that you have somewhere else that you need to be. Another good option that you could use is, let's catch up properly sometime. Let's catch up properly sometime. Meaning, I don't have enough time to speak with you now, but let's do it in the future. Let's do it in the future. So in the office, people will often say, right, let's get back to it. Or let's get back to work. Let's get back to work. And a funny thing that we normally do when we say this phrase is slapping our knees. Right, let's get back to it. Or, right, I've got to go now. I've got to get some work done now. And speaking about more work to do, you have also got some work to do. You need to continue practicing these alternatives to improve your English daily. So, my lovelies, that's it for today's lesson, our first official lesson here on YouTube. I hope you learned something, and don't forget to connect with me across all of my social media. I've got my Instagram at Tasha's English, and I'm also on TikTok with the same handle, Tasha's English. And remember, you can also check out my conversation classes starting this week. Yes, this week, 1st of December, for a 90-minute session on Zoom with other international learners just like yourself. And I'd leave all the information and deets about those in the comment section below. So that's it, and see ya. See you next time for our next lesson here at Tasha's English. Love you guys to the moon and back. Bye bye for now.